What if a cowboy bought a ranch for just $35, only to find 3 Apache girls hiding inside, with a past too painful to believe? This shocking truth will break your heart and change everything. Like, subscribe, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Let's get started. The cowboy, James Harlan, had spent half his life swinging hammers for the railroad, laying iron under the burning sun. His wages were meager, but he saved every coin, dreaming of owning land. When word spread in town about a ranch sold for just $35, folks chuckled. They called it worthless, cursed ground where no man lasted. But James wasn't superstitious. To him, land was land. With a slip of paper and a pocket nearly empty, he rode out and claimed it, believing he had finally won himself a future worth building. The ranch, though, was nothing like his dreams. Weather-beaten fences sagged, the barn's roof leaned crooked, and weeds choked the empty corral. The cabin itself looked like it had barely survived the last storm. Cracked windows rattled in their frames, and the porch creaked beneath his boots. Still, as James stood there in the fading light, he felt pride. For the first time in his life, he owned something. This patch of earth was his, rough and worn as it was. He saw promise where others saw ruin. He unpacked his meager belongings, an old blanket, a kettle, his rifle, and laid them inside the cabin. The air smelled of dust and disuse, carrying a strange weight, as if the place remembered sorrow. James shrugged it off, striking a match to light the lantern. Shadows stretched across the rough wooden walls. He brewed coffee with water from the well, though it tasted bitter, tinged with rust. Outside, coyotes howled across the prairie. Yet in his heart, James felt something new, a restless hope whispering that maybe his life had turned a corner. The first night fell cold, wind sighing through the broken boards. James lay on his bedroll near the fireplace, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house echoed louder than it should have. He told himself the noises were just the wind, just the settling of old wood. But as midnight crept near, he heard something else, light, deliberate movements from upstairs. His hand drifted to his revolver. He froze, listening. Again, a shuffle, quick and quiet. His pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. Carefully, James rose, boots silent on the cabin floor. He slid the revolver from its holster, thumb brushing the worn handle. The stairs groaned beneath his weight as he climbed, the lantern's glow flickering shadows along the wall. At the top, a narrow hall stretched into darkness. A door stood slightly ajar. He steadied his breath, pushed it open with the barrel of his gun, and stepped inside. The lantern flame caught movement, and then James froze, every thought shattering in shock. 3 figures huddled in the corner, pressed against the wall. Not bandits, not thieves. Girls, Apache girls, no older than children. One looked about 12, another perhaps 15, the eldest maybe 17. Their faces were drawn with hunger, their eyes wide with terror. They clutched each other as if expecting death. The eldest raised a trembling hand, whispering something in her tongue. The youngest whimpered, her thin frame shaking beneath a torn blanket. James's breath caught. This was no haunting, no curse. It was something far stranger. Lowering his revolver, James stared, unsure of what to do. He had heard tales of Apache raids, of clashes between settlers and tribes. Men in town spoke of them as enemies, shadows in the hills. Yet here they were, not warriors but frightened girls, hiding in the bones of a broken ranch. Their clothes were worn thin, their cheeks hollow with hunger. The eldest girl's dark eyes burned with defiance, even as her hands trembled. James saw fear but also strength. He holstered his gun slowly, lifting his lantern higher to show his face. The girls flinched at the light, whispering to one another. The eldest spoke halting English, her voice raw. "We stay. Please. No tell." Her words broke, but the meaning was clear. They weren't here to fight, only to survive. James felt the weight of their fear press against him, heavier than any curse the land had carried. He could have ordered them out, claimed the cabin as his alone. But as he looked into their eyes, something in him shifted. These weren't trespassers. They were orphans of a world that had already taken too much. James crouched slowly, setting the lantern on the floor so its glow softened the shadows. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small loaf of bread he had carried from town. Breaking it in half, he placed it on the floor and slid it toward them. The youngest girl hesitated, then darted forward, snatching the bread and retreating. She tore into it with desperate hunger. The others followed, cautious but unable to resist. Watching them eat, James felt a pang deep in his chest, sharper than hunger, heavier than loneliness. He spoke gently, though his voice carried the grit of the plains. "You've been here long?" The eldest girl met his gaze but did not answer. Her silence spoke enough. He imagined them sneaking food, drinking from the well, surviving alone in this decaying place. Ghosts in human form, overlooked by the world. The town had called the ranch cursed, but James began to see the truth. The curse wasn't the land. It was the cruelty of men who had left these children to fend for themselves. The night grew long, but James did not send them away. Instead, he laid his blanket on the floor and kept the fire burning. The girls huddled close together, drifting into uneasy sleep, their faces softened by exhaustion. James sat awake, staring into the flames, questions storming his mind. Who had they lost? Where was their family? How had they come to hide here? He had bought a ranch for $35, but what he truly found that night was a secret that would change his life forever. As dawn bled across the horizon, the cabin seemed different. The whispers of curses felt hollow now. Upstairs, 3 girls stirred beneath the fragile light, alive and breathing in a world that had nearly crushed them. James rubbed his weary eyes, knowing he stood at a crossroads. He had come here seeking a future for himself, but perhaps, without meaning to, he had stumbled upon something greater, a future tied to lives that had nowhere else to go. And in that quiet morning, he swore he would not turn away. James lowered his revolver completely, sliding it back into the holster as the fire crackled faintly in the hearth. His heart still pounded from the shock of finding them. The 3 Apache girls, 12, 15, and 17, looked like shadows of children, their cheeks hollow, hair tangled, wrapped in blankets that barely held warmth. Their eyes darted between fear and defiance, never resting long on his face. James wanted to speak, but words stuck in his throat. He had come expecting loneliness, yet found a burden heavier than the land he had bought. The eldest girl finally whispered in broken English, her voice sharp with both plea and warning. "We stay, please not tell." She held her younger sisters close, as if shielding them from an invisible hand ready to strike. James studied their faces, realizing they had been through things even grown men wouldn't endure. His chest tightened as guilt washed over him. Guilt not for what he had done, but for what the world had done to them. He understood one truth instantly. These girls were survivors, but barely. When James asked what happened, the eldest tried to speak, though her words faltered, broken by tears she fought to hide. Slowly, the story unfolded. Their village had been attacked months ago. Soldiers, maybe, or raiders, it hardly mattered. Their home burned, families scattered, screams lost in the night. They had fled, too young to know where to go, too scared to trust anyone. The ranch had become their hiding place, a shelter of rot and splinters. They lived on scraps, water from the well, and courage no child should ever need. James listened, his fists clenched against the weight of their suffering. In town, men spoke of raids and savages, but no one told stories like this, of children left with nothing. He glanced around the cabin, realizing what it had become, not just a ruin, but a fragile lifeline for these 3 souls. His throat ached, yet no tears came. He was a man raised to be tough, but toughness had never faced this kind of truth. He hadn't just bought cursed land, he had stepped into their silent hell. The youngest girl, barely 12, gnawed at the crust of bread he had given her, eyes still flicking with fear toward his revolver. James softened his voice, almost a whisper. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you while I'm here." They didn't seem to believe him, not yet. He didn't blame them. Words were cheap, promises cheaper. The world had already broken every oath to them. But James knew one thing about himself. When he made a vow, he lived by it. That night he swore silently he would not let them face it alone. Morning light seeped through the cracked windows, painting the cabin in a pale glow. The girls stirred slowly, exhaustion still weighing heavy on them. James brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the room, and cooked what little bacon he had left. The girls stared as he divided the food, giving them the larger portions. Hunger overcame hesitation, and soon they were eating, fragile hands gripping each piece as if it might disappear. Watching them, James felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't known in years. Purpose, born from tragedy. Later, he stepped outside, boots crunching on dry earth, staring across the ranch. The fences leaned, the barn sagged, the land begged for work. But James's thoughts weren't on cattle or crops. They were on the girls, still trembling in the cabin behind him. How could he protect them? If the town found out, trouble would follow. Folks feared what they didn't understand, and Apache children in a white man's ranch would spark whispers, maybe worse. Yet he couldn't send them away. He knew it deep in his bones. They were his responsibility now. When he returned inside, the eldest girl's eyes followed him carefully. She finally spoke her name, Elena. Her sisters, she explained in broken English, were Mariah and Taya, names whispered like fragile secrets. James repeated them softly, committing them to memory, careful not to let them slip away as so much else had for them. For the first time, Eleanor's shoulders eased just slightly, though her gaze still held guarded fire. Trust would not come easy, but it had begun. And James, hardened rail worker turned cowboy, felt honored by that small gift. That night the wind howled through the prairie, rattling the shutters like bones. James sat awake near the fire, rifle resting at his knee. Every creak of the cabin set his nerves on edge, not from the girls, but from what might come. If raiders returned, if townsfolk found out, if hunger pressed too hard. He stared into the flames, thinking of choices he never imagined. He had dreamed of cattle and fences, but dreams had shifted. Now his future meant 3 lives who looked at him with fear and hope entwined. The following days blurred into work and watchfulness. James patched the roof, rebuilt parts of the fence, and hauled water from the well. Each task felt heavier, not because of the labor, but because he wasn't working for himself anymore. Inside, the girls grew less fearful, though they still clung together. Taya, the youngest, began humming softly when she thought he couldn't hear. Mariah asked shy questions about his horse. Elena, still protective, helped with chores, though her eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. Together they slowly turned the cursed ranch into something else. Home. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, James stood by the porch rail while the girls sat near the fire inside. The land stretched endless before him, quiet but alive. He thought of the $35 he had spent, money saved over years of sweat and blistered hands. At the time, he thought he bought dirt and timber. Now, standing there, he realized what he had truly bought was responsibility, not land, not cattle, but lives. And though it terrified him, it also gave him something he had never known, family. That night, beneath the broken roof and the stars beyond, James made a vow that felt heavier than iron. He would keep the girls safe. He would feed them, guard them, give them a chance at life the world tried to steal. He wasn't a father, wasn't a hero, just a cowboy who stumbled into their story. But he swore with every breath he had left he would not let the world take them again. The ranch wasn't cursed, it was chosen, and now so was he.